All right, we are back talking about Survivor 41. Now, the reason there wasn't a video last week was because I was traveling for Thanksgiving. There wasn't really much room in the schedule despite what happened in the last episode. But now we're finally back talking about Survivor. And in this video, we're going to basically talk about what happened both in last week's episode as well as last night's episode to get a sense of where things stand in the game. Obviously, a lot has changed in terms of in-game position for a lot of these players, and with that comes big changes to the power ranking. So I'm pretty excited to talk about what happened the last 2 weeks. And without further delay, let's get started. So since my last video, two players have been eliminated from the game, and obviously, as usual with these power rankings, it's best to talk about those two players first. So at number 8, we have Chantal. Now, I've talked about this before, how I felt like Chantal has been set up for a downfall for quite a while now. The show has focused quite a bit on her feud with Deshawn, and it really focused on her as a leader, trying being a bit too overbearing at points, so I felt like it was a matter of time before Downfall was being set up. What I found interesting though was that it was ultimately Ricard that got the credit for creating this flip against Chantel, really calling back to that moments before the merge where the two of them got into a fight, really set that ripped over the extra vote. I was starting to question a little bit, like whether that was actually going to come back into play, whether that was actually going to amount to anything. And as we found out in last week's episode, it did amount to something where it was foreshadowing this eventual flip. Now, it has been clarified since then that Ricard and Chantal have had this really close relationship on the island, and that the two of them were pretty competitive players. They both respected each other a lot. But with that said, they knew that they would have to flip on each other at some point, and it was nice to see that we got at least some setup to that before the merge. So I'm glad that they at least followed up on that. But as I said, Chantal has been set up for downfall in her edit. She's become way too big of a threat, obviously, with her work in the pre-merge, obviously building bonds with most of the Uwa tribe, only for her to vote them out. Like Ricard really stuck by her side during that, while also acknowledging that if she was capable of making other UA members trust her, only to blindside them, that it was only a matter of time before she would in turn do that to him. So he wanted to take that shot before she could do it in turn. Obviously, was able to get Xander on board, like sort of the person at the bottom there. Was also able to flip Erica and Heather to really get the plan on board. And obviously, Danny and Deshawn were involved as well. They were able to split the vote 3-3. And on the revote, they were able to vote Chantal with her idol in her pocket. But overall, I feel like Chantal played a pretty strong game on the whole. I mean, like I said, she played a very strong, dominant game in the pre-merge. Really was the center of that Uwa tribe. Really got most of the tribe to trust her. I mean, we see people like JD, Jeannie, Brad talk in their post-game interviews about how they saw Chantal as her closest ally and how they believe that she was their number one ally right up until she blindsided them. Obviously, she chose to stick with Ricard. Now, I know some people have questioned whether or not sticking with Ricard was a mistake, as obviously Ricard was more strategic than people like Jeannie, who she cut, and only for Ricard to be the one to turn on her at the end of the day. I mean, I could see it like that way, but however, I feel like in the moment, like she saw Ricard as one of his closest allies. She saw him as someone that could be a sounding board for her to talk strategy. So I don't think it was the worst strategy in the world, considering how she dominated during a lot of that post merge. Now I will fault her a bit for not securing Ricard's loyalty more. It seemed like as time went on, she was starting to side more with the other people of color in the Camp Out Alliance, like Liana, of course, as well as Danny and Deshawn. And of course, there's also her feud with Deshawn. Like she really struggled to get Deshawn to stick with her, like as she felt like Deshawn wasn't really on board with a lot of the plans. So obviously there were factors that were highlighted both in the edit, both as well as in game position. And obviously the other big mistake was getting rid of Nasir at that last tribal before she was taken out. Like Nasir was someone that probably would have stayed loyal to her in the long term. And the fact that Ricard was able to convince her to cut Nasir, someone that was loyal to her but not so loyal to Ricard, was a bit of a mistake, really weakened her position and set her up to be taken out in this fashion moving forward. So obviously, she became too big of a threat. I feel like getting rid of Nasir was a mistake that led to her downfall. And in general, like the edit was foreseeing a lot of this stuff happening. Like I said, like episodes leading up in the post merge highlighted her feud with Deshawn, how Deshawn felt like he wasn't being listened to. And obviously, before the merge, we saw her feud with Ricard. That ultimately foreshadowed Ricard being the one to make the move against her. So I still feel like Chantal played a really strong game on the whole. However, she struggled with threat management a bit, and I feel like her not having Ricard in her back pocket all the way is something that contributed to her downfall. So I'm not too surprised that she was voted out in this spot. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have the other boot. This one from last night's episode. We have Liana. Now, obviously, Liana was Chantal's second in command during this portion of the game, and she was the only one to, other than Chantal, to be left out of the Chantal blind side. So she was really left on the outs after this previous vote, and obviously going into this next round, she was in a pretty dire situation where it was either her or Ricard going home. And while there was potential for Ricard to be voted out or for Deshawn to be eliminated through the do or die twist, obviously with Danny and Deshawn both being immune, and again, Ricard not really making much sense to be voted out at this point. Like Liana was the inevitable target there. So, I'm not too surprised to see Liana go out here. Now, overall, I think Liana played a pretty mixed game, I feel like. I mean, obviously on Yase, she was in the majority for most of that pre-merge. I mean, she was in that core alliance of the women with Evie and Tiffany. Like, really, was able to get by through that. Then we get to the merge where she obviously made the flip to flip from Yase to the Luvu/Uwa majority alliance. I mean, part of that was to be a part of the Camp Out alliance with all the people of color, and obviously her relationship with Chantal that she forged during her trip to the summit. But obviously, at the same time, she did it in a way that completely alienated the Yase members. Like, I felt like she could have handled that much better to really try to play both sides to a certain extent, to be able to work with the people that she built on the other side without completely alienating those people that she had on Yase. So I think that was a bit of a mistake there, but obviously through her siding with the Lulu alliance, she was able to be in the majority for those early votes, taking out Tiffany and Evie in relatively quick succession. Obviously, from then on out, like she was very close to Chantal. Like she probably could have gone to the end with Chantal if they had been able to hold the numbers. But obviously, there was foreshadowing towards her that group sort of falling apart, like with the feud with Deshawn, and obviously with Ricard orchestrating the flip against Chantal that led to her being eliminated. There, that's not particularly great. Obviously, there's the big misstep of misplaying her knowledge is power advantage, trying to steal Xander's idol only for her to be outplayed there. Now, obviously, like she assumed Xander would have the idol. Xander even presented the idol, and you could fault her a bit for not recognizing that this was clearly a red herring there. But obviously, it's still bad that like she misplayed that knowledge is power advantage. And I said at the time that like from an Edgic perspective, her misplaying that knowledge is power advantage was what killed her for me in terms of her winner chances. And I was largely right, as I feel like afterwards, like her content was very meandering, like not very positive, and obviously her relationship with Chantal was a problem in the sense that once that core flipped on them, that it was only a matter of time before she got picked off. Obviously, Chantal went home after the flip, and she didn't really have much she could do after that either. So I don't really think there was much to do in that regard. Now, one thing I did find a bit interesting, I actually found out about this afterwards, was that the game within the game for this episode was $1 million mistake, and I felt that was pretty interesting. Considering Liana was the boot there, and she had that whole arc way back in episode 3 talking about how this was her $1 million mistake and not getting rid of Xander. Now, I was a bit disappointed that Xander didn't get more content this episode. We'll talk about that a bit more when we get to Xander on the list. But obviously, she had that feud with Xander, and I felt like the edit was very clearly setting up that she would be on the losing side of that. So I don't think that was particularly great. Really, again, I was pretty low on Liana after her knowledge is power mishap, and I feel like her in-game position was set up so that if Chantel was ever flipped on, that she wouldn't have many options after that, really. So I don't, it doesn't surprise me that she was taken out immediately after Chantel's, but I don't think she played the worst game in the world. I don't think she's the worst player in the world, and I feel like if she were to come back, that she could potentially change some things, like be a bit more independent strategically, and definitely do better on return. But in terms of her game this season, I feel like it was pretty mixed. So I have her here at number 7. And with that out of the way, let's get to the 6 players still in the game. We'll be ranking them based on how likely I think it is that they'll win the game. So with that out of the way, let's start with number 6, and it is Heather again. Now, again, Heather hasn't really gotten that much content throughout the season. She has been a bit more relevant in terms of the gameplay. I mean, obviously, in last week's episode, she was set up as being part of a duo with Erica, and that group was able to come together to form this majority, a 6-2 majority that was able to split the vote to get rid of Chantel. And then continuing into this episode, we see that sort of play out again, where she's kind of in this Final Four alliance with her, Erica, Xander, and Ricard. That group was able to stick together and able to vote out Liana on that vote. So she has been a bit more relevant in terms of the gameplay. And I feel like going into this final 6, she's in this duo with Erica, where I feel like through that, she has a much higher likelihood of getting to the end of the game. I feel like she is probably going to get to the final 4, at least to the final 4, I should say, and probably get to the final 3 as well, assuming she doesn't lose the fire making challenge. However, I feel like a lot of that will come down to whether she is placed in the fire making challenge. I mean, she isn't that big of a jury threat, so I don't feel like people will necessarily put her through fire. Like if it's just a matter of determining who the biggest jury threat is. However, I feel like at the end of the day, she's not going to win either way because the way I see her game playing out is she'll either lose the fire making challenge if she's put in there, or she'll get to the end and not really get any jury votes. I mean, she hasn't really been garnering that much respect in terms of the jury. I mean, we've heard people talk about her on the jury, her saying that she hasn't really built that many bonds with people outside of Erica. Like people haven't really connected that much to her, and obviously the edit hasn't really been backing her up either. And obviously that doesn't bode well to her winning chances. And obviously, if gets put in the fire, like I don't have a whole lot of confidence that she'll be able to win that situation. I mean, so either way, I mean, I think she isn't winning the game. Like I feel like she doesn't have that much of a case to win the game. However, at this point, I do have a better sense of how she'll do in terms of the rest of the game, like her overall trajectory. And again, I see her making it to at least the final four, and from there, it's just a matter of whether she loses that fire making challenge or if she gets to the final three and is a losing finalist. So that's how I see her game playing at this point. So I had to leave her here number six. Don't really see her winning the game. Now we're moving on to number five, and this person has dropped off quite a bit since my last power ranking. Now, to be fair, there have been two episodes, and I don't think my opinion of this player has changed too much. I mean, I still think this player will probably get towards the end of the game. However, I just don't see this person winning a jury vote, and that is Xander. Now, what I find interesting about Xander is that he's the only person left in the game that hasn't gotten any real personal content. I mean, if we're going through the rest of the players, I mean, we have Erica, who obviously got a lot of personal content at the merge. We have Ricard, who got content like early on talking about his family in the premiere, and obviously a couple episodes ago where he got to talk about him being hard of hearing, so he got content there. Deshawn got personal content during his summit visit, like he got to talk about his family there. Heather didn't really get that much personal content, but she had that weird moment during the reward challenge where she really struggled there, and we obviously had the Luvu members really supporting her there, cheering her on. So I'll count that as such. And in this most recent episode, we got personal content from Danny, where he talked a lot about his dad dying at a young age, and obviously talking about his life there. So really, when we're looking at it, Xander has gotten the least amount of personal content of the people still in the game. Like we don't really know much about him out as a person, and I find that very interesting considering how far he's gotten. And I don't think that really bodes well for his chances of winning the game. Now, we did get some gameplay content from him in the last two episodes. Obviously, he was part of that majority in the Chantal vote. And in the most recent episode, we got obviously him being in this final four arrangement with him, Ricard, Heather, and Erica. He got a confessional talking about how he wants to keep Ricard around as a shield. And at Tribal Council, he used his extra vote to ensure that Liana would go home. Now, obviously, with that comes a pretty big missed opportunity where obviously a big storyline of the season has been his rivalry with Liana. And obviously, that was set up through a number of episodes. And I always felt like Xander would win the war against those two. I felt like he would ultimately be the one to take out Liana as opposed to the other way around. But that wasn't really focused on this episode. I mean, aside from him talking about keeping Ricard around, I mean, we don't really hear much about Xander wanting to take out Liana. And obviously, this was a moment where I feel like that could have been highlighted on. Like, obviously, he used his extra vote to ensure that Liana would go home, and yet that isn't focused on at all. Like, it kind of comes out of left field that he even plays the extra vote. So I feel like that was a pretty big missed opportunity there, and really, I think, speaks to how low of a winner chances he has if that storyline doesn't get the resolution that I think it should have gotten. Now, I think moving forward, I think he'll be in an okay game position. I think he'll at least get to the final five, where at that point, I feel like he'll be sort of in the middle of two duos with Erica and Heather probably still be in the game, as well as Danny and Deshawn. He'll probably have to pick a side there. He'll probably, and with his idol, he'll probably get to the final four, where at that point, I think there's a good chance he'll go to Fire. Now, I think he'll probably win Fire, especially if he's against Heather or even Erica potentially. So I think he'll, like Heather, he has a decent shot at getting towards the end of the game, and probably even a higher chance than Heather of actually getting to Final Tribal. It's just a matter of whether he can win. And honestly, I don't think he can win a jury vote at this point. I mean, Liana might vote for him potentially, but I don't see Tiffany voting for him. I don't see Evie voting for him. I mean, I don't see Chantal voting for Xander. I mean, I think he doesn't really have many things going for him for entering the final tribal. Now, I think some of that is due to things outside of his control, like the fact that he's only 20 years old. Like, he's pretty young, like, compared to a lot of the people still in the game. And obviously, demographically, like, the show has focused so much this season on the Camp Out Alliance and how this season's all about diversity and having more people of color involved. So obviously for him being a straight white male, I don't think that narrative really bodes well for him doing well in the game. Like, I feel like there are a number of things going against him that are outside of his control, but I feel like even outside that, like, you could argue that like a lot of his big moves in the game has come through him using advantages such as the knowledge is power advantage, which obviously, you can give him some credit for being involved with that, but we learned from afterwards that it was really Tiffany's idea to orchestrate that plan. Like, he was just the one that got the credit in that moment because obviously he was the one that had the fake idol to handle Liana, and obviously was pretty integral in fooling Liana into thinking that he still had the idol. But it was really Tiffany's idea to put that plan together. And obviously, there's also him using his extra vote, which, obviously you can give him some credit there for, as that probably increased the likelihood that people like Erica and Heather would stick with Ricard and him for that next vote. Although at the same time, you could say that, well, he used an advantage as opposed to other social means. So I feel like there are a number of things going against Xander going into a jury vote. But I don't think he's the worst player in the world. I mean, we'll talk more about him in the player ranking that I'll be doing after the season. But I feel like based on things, but mostly out of his control. But obviously, there are also like his game hasn't been super duper like impressive, like outside of his use of advantages. Yeah, I feel like all that leads me to believe that he's probably not going to win, even though I think there is a higher likelihood now of him actually reaching to the final tribal council. So because of that, I decided to have him here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we have the person that I technically had at number 1 last week, but I wasn't feeling super confident about it. I felt like this person was number 1 mostly because they had the closest thing to resembling a winner's edit. But this last 2 episodes have really highlighted a lot of this person's flaws. It makes me think that they're much less likely to actually win the game at this point. So at this point, we have Deshawn at number 4. Now, like I said, I feel like these past 2 episodes were really bad for Deshawn. Obviously, we had the storyline for a while of him having this rivalry with Chantal. Like, we really saw him like really get upset with her to the point where we felt like he would flip, and that did happen in last week's episode. But the interesting there is that Ricard was the one that got to get the bulk of the credit for that, and Deshawn didn't really get much credit at all. In fact, if anything, it seems like he was reacting more towards what other people were doing, which contributes to the perception of him being an emotional player. And that really carried through into this episode as well, where we get that long scene at the beginning of him trying to cool down the fires, like with Liana, and really try to explain his game. But I feel like it was so bad to where, like, he tells Liana that it was Ricard's idea to vote out Chantal. And to me, that's just a really bad look for him. I mean, it really makes Liana believe that he's this emotional player. In fact, we even see in the previous episode that as Chantal was getting up to have her torch enough, that she calls Deshawn a snake. I mean, and I feel like that really is harming his relationship to the jury to where even if he gets to the end, which I think is more likely now, he's probably not going to win a jury vote, in my opinion. And obviously in this past episode, we also saw him be the recipient of the do or die twist, which was a bit of a surprise to me. Like, I felt like Danny or Heather were the two most likely to get the do or die twist. However, once it became apparent that he would be getting it, I didn't have much doubt that he would actually stay over this. I feel like the edit has been focusing so much on his relationships and his bad jury management to where it would be very anticlimactic for him to be going out through the do or die twist. I feel like the show is setting up for him to be a losing final tribal council performer in that regard. So I don't think he was actually going home here. And I did like the fact that he was at least immune after going through the do or die, as otherwise I felt like he would have been such an easy target in that regard. So I feel like that was at least something production did right in that regard. But moving forward, I think Deshawn is probably in an interesting position. I mean, we're going into the final 6. There's technically 3 duos where obviously Deshawn is kind of in a duo with Danny. Erica and Heather are a duo, and we have Xander and Ricard kind of being a duo. I mean, not really. I mean, Xander does want to keep Ricard around as a shield, but that probably isn't going to stick around all the way to the end. So I think a flip will happen now. Obviously, Deshawn was left out of the Liana vote. Like he voted with Liana, was left out. He's technically on the bottom now. But I don't think he's the next boot per se. I feel like there will be another flip happening in this next vote, probably to take out Ricard. And I feel like if Deshawn can probably make it towards the end, like especially now that he is being perceived as less of a jury threat, I feel like that probably increases the likelihood that like when it comes time to break up the Danny and Deshawn duo, that they'll probably be more likely to take out Danny. I feel like Danny is more likely to be perceived as this big jury threat. So I think Deshawn, through that, is able to get to the end more easily. But again, it's just a matter of if he can win. And I feel like these last two episodes have really highlighted so much of his flaws and really so much of his bad jury management, especially with Chantal and Liana. And I feel like at this point, like I have a hard time seeing him winning a jury vote. So while I have had him high in the sense that I think he would make it towards the end, probably be less likely to be actually voted out, I feel like these last two episodes have really highlighted that he probably won't win even if he gets to the end. So I decided to leave Deshawn here at number 4. Now we're moving on to number 3, and we have a person who I think will probably be the next boot, which is funny considering I have said that about this person multiple times now throughout the merge, and yet they just keep surviving. But I feel like at this point in the season, with the numbers really dwindling down, I just feel like it's just a matter of time now. So at number 3, we have Ricard. Now, again, I feel like Ricard is probably one of the bigger jury threats of the people still in the game. I feel like him pulling off the Chantal move at the last round was a big boon for his game. Like obviously in that last episode, he got a lot of the credit for doing so, and obviously we got the setup for that before the merge, where we had that rift between him and Chantal over the extra vote. I was starting to question whether that would really amount to anything, but we obviously saw last week that it did amount to something. It was foreshadowing Ricard eventually flipping. And I feel like it was the perfect time for him to do so. Like, obviously, with Chantel being as big of a threat as she was, and with her having that other option with the Camp Out Alliance, I feel like it was the right time for him to make that move. Now, you do have to fault him a little bit for having to win that immunity in the last episode in order to survive, but he did it, so that's something at least. And obviously, in this most recent episode, he was another target to be going on the board. Obviously, Danny, Deshawn, and Liana were targeting him as a big threat. Although we saw Xander talking about keeping him around as a shield and even using his extra vote to keep him in the game. Obviously, that alliance he has of him, Xander, Erica, and Heather seems to be holding after that round. However, I do think with this being the final 6 now, I think there is a matter of time before a flip does happen that results in Ricard exiting the game. I feel like at this point he is the biggest jury threat still in the game. I feel like people that are keeping him around solely as a shield while they take out other threats or people that they want out before the end. But I don't see people actually wanting to take him to the end. I mean, he has been a target a number of times now in the post merge. Again, obviously, he's gone around that through winning immunity and pulling off moves such as this. But I feel like with this now being the final 6 and the way the game is being set up, I think a flip will happen to where Ricard will probably be going home. The way I see the vote breaking down is that we have these two pretty solid duos with Danny Deshawn in one corner, Erica and Heather in another corner, and then we have Ricard and Xander. Now, like I said, Xander is keeping Ricard around as a shield, which probably implies that he doesn't actually want to take him all the way to the end. So I feel like considering that Chantal has been propping up Ricard, obviously on her way out, she says that she would vote for Ricard if he got to the end. And obviously, with people recognizing that he is a big jury threat, I feel like what will probably happen is that Danny and Deshawn will be at the bottom, but that Erica and Heather will probably cause a flip. They'll probably team up with Danny and Deshawn to take out Ricard. And Xander could be on that too. It's not entirely clear. I mean, but he could join in as well. So basically, Ricard's only option to getting towards the end is winning out, which obviously if that's the case, that's not great for him if on a winner ranking, but he would win if he gets to the end, so that's something at least. Like I feel like these last few episodes have been a bit more positive towards him. I mean, obviously he did get the bulk of the credit for the Chantel move, and even in this episode, he got to talk a bit about the Sean really dumping on the Sean over being an emotional player. So I think there have been things going for Ricard as of late, but I feel like from a pure game position, I feel like Ricard's number could be coming up relatively soon. Now, I know it's crazy because I have said multiple times that Ricard is probably the next boot. And to be fair, it's not like I've been wrong per se. I mean, we have seen Ricard being targeted, but just hasn't actually been voted out either to immunity or to other circumstances, such as bigger threats in the game. But I feel like with the people left in the game and the way the game is shaking out, I feel like this has to be Ricard's time. And if he does manage to win out or find a way out of this, then I will have to give him a lot of credit. But the way things have been, I feel like Ricard is recognized as a jury threat and probably will be taken out in short fashion. But if he isn't, then it'll be interesting to talk about. So I have Ricard here at number three. Now moving on to number two, and I feel like this person is in a pretty similar ballpark to Ricard. I feel like they probably aren't going to win the game, probably because they're too big of a jury threat and will probably be taken out in the next couple rounds. Although I will say this person will probably survive one more round than Ricard, barring an immunity win from Ricard, and that is Danny. Now, I'll say up front, I'll say I've been pretty impressed by the game Dan's been playing, and I'll be impressed that he's gotten more screen time in the last couple episodes. I mean, he got a surprisingly strong showing in the Chantal episode last week, and last night, obviously, we got that whole moment of him getting personal content talking about his dad. And I'll admit that I actually thought that was going to be his downfall because I'll say up front that I felt like he was going to be the victim of do or die. I felt like Danny was the most likely person to fall out of the challenge, get the die option, go out of the game that way. And I felt like when we got that personal segment of him talking about his dad, I felt like that was an affirmation of that. However, to see that that not only didn't happen, but Danny actually won the immunity challenge, like was a bit of a surprise there. I'm kind of glad that he didn't get screwed over by this twist. And obviously, later on, we see him strategize with Deshawn to try to get out Ricard. Was out on the vote there. Like, obviously, he's technically on the bottom now. So he's technically not in a great spot after this vote. However, I will say that he probably won't be the next boot. Well, okay. If Ricard wins immunity in the next episode, he probably will be taken out. However, I think, assuming Ricard doesn't win immunity here, I think what will happen is that he and Deshawn will be able to team up with Erica and Heather, form a majority alliance there, and take out Ricard, who is probably a bigger jury threat than Ricard. However, I will say that Danny is will still be a jury threat moving forward. I know people have talked about liking Danny, and I feel like if he gets to the end, he has a pretty good case to make, especially if he's against Sean and Heather. But I feel like people will recognize that he is a jury threat, and I feel like him having one immunity at this point will raise some concerns that he could win out. So I feel like he could be taken out that way. If he gets to the end, I think he'll probably win. It's just a matter of if he can get there. Now, honestly, I don't think he will get there. I think he will be taken out sooner or later. But the reason I have him above Ricard is because I feel like there's more of a case for him to get to the end than Ricard, who Ricard, I feel like, has to win immunity no matter what from here on out. Whereas Danny will only be voted out if Ricard wins immunity, and even then, there's a chance to go vote out Xander. So there's no guarantees there. But I feel like the person we'll be talking about, number one, not only has a better shot getting towards the end than Danny, but still has enough respect from the jury to where they'll probably win if they get to the end. So I have to leave Danny here at number two. And finally, number one, the person I believe has the best chance of winning Survivor 41 at this point is Erica. Now, again, it's a bit surprising to see her this high. Like, obviously, I've had her this low for so much of the season. It's just a matter of all the more blatant edge contenders getting taken out that has caused me to really propel Erica. I feel like at this point, considering the rest of the field, I feel like she probably has the best case to get to the end and also win a jury vote if she gets there. However, I will say she probably isn't the biggest jury threat on the board. I feel like Ricard and Danny would probably beat her if she got to the end. But I feel like outside of that, she could probably beat everyone else in the jury vote. I feel like she'll beat Heather in a jury vote. I feel like she'll beat Xander in a jury vote. And after these last two episodes, I'm pretty convinced that she could also beat Deshawn in a jury vote. And considering her game position at this point, I feel like she is in a relatively good position to get towards the end. She has her duo with Heather. Like she also has another duo with Danny and Deshawn that she could team up with to take out Ricard moving forward. There's Ricard, someone who somewhat trusts her at this point and is willing to work with her if things don't work out the way with Danny and Deshawn. And of course, there's Xander, who doesn't really have that much of a relationship with her, but doesn't seem to be like hostile in any sense. So I feel like she's in a relatively good position to survive the next couple of rounds. I feel like she'll probably be able to take out Ricard after that. I feel like that will be her big move going towards the end of the game. And obviously from there, I mean, I feel like if she can get out Danny as another big jury threat, then she's in the final four where she could either win immunity or get into the fire making challenge. I feel like if she's able to get to the final four, then that's a pretty ideal position for her to be in. Now, I feel like she'll probably be targeted at that point, probably by the Deshawns and Xanders of the world. But with that fire making challenge and with Heather around, I feel like Erica is probably in a better position to get towards the end than Ricard or Danny at this point. Now, I will say that in terms of the edit, these last two episodes have been a bit disappointing for her. I feel like with Chantal and Liana both being relatively big players to be taken out, the fact that Erica doesn't get much credit for those moves is a pretty big knock to her edit. I feel like those would have been great moments for her to really jump to the forefront and really elaborate on her storyline of her turning from a lamb to a lion. However, with like there still being jury threats around with Ricard and Danny, I feel like those are going to be opportunities for her to jump out. I would be very shocked if we didn't see one of those two moves happen without Erica getting a ton of credit for those moves. But at the end of the day, it's still disappointing to see that she hasn't gotten the credit for that. It's weird thinking that Erica is number 1 in this power ranking considering how low I've had her for so much of the season. And even now, like, even in the post-merge where she should be getting more screen time if she were a clear front runner edgically, she hasn't been on the forefront. I feel like Ricard has been getting more screen time than her, which is a bit disappointing to see. But I feel like a lot of this is based on game position at this point. I feel like Erica is just better positioned to get towards the end than Ricard and Danny. I would be very surprised if she gets to the next round without taking one of those two out. I mean, and aside from that, I feel like outside of Ricard and Danny, who are probably bigger jury threats than her, she's probably the next person up there in terms of winning a jury vote. And I feel like there is potential for her to get to the end with Heather, Xander, Deshawn, like some combination of that, and win a jury vote that way. And I feel like there is edgically, even though it has been disappointing and sort of muted in this post merge, there is still potential for her to jump out and have her signature move, whether that being taking out a card or winning immunity, something like that that could really make us see her as a worthy winner, or at least to the casuals' eyes, I should say. So I feel like there are still things going for her, and I feel like out of the people left in the game, she has the least amount of flaws, both from a edging perspective and from an in-game standpoint. And I guess that's the reason I have her in number 1. Again, this has been a very crazy season in terms of the editing, so it'll be interesting to see how it wraps up. But after this point in the season, I feel like Erica is the most likely person to win Survivor 41. And there we go. That will do it for this week's installment of the Survivor 41 Power Rankings. Again, I know there wasn't a video last week, so I hope this one really covered everything from the last two episodes. Now, I guess I should take some time to explain the plan for the rest of the season. So, obviously, there are two episodes left. There's an episode on December 8th, and the finale will be airing on December 15th. And with that, I am obviously adjusting the way I'm covering Survivor 41 to end it. So, next week's video, we'll be going over jury scenarios. So that'll be kind of like the power rankings, but I'll be going more into detail about possible final three combinations and who I think would win in those scenarios. The week after that, I'm planning to do a review where I'll share some of my more personal thoughts about the season. That should be pretty interesting. And then the week after that, I'll be doing a player ranking where I'll be ranking all 18 players based on the games that they played on their season. It should be very interesting to cover. Probably a different list than these power rankings, which focus more on the edit and how likely I think it was that they would win the game. This will be covering more the game that was actually played, so that should be pretty interesting to see. But for now, that is the video. See ya.